The moment I stepped onto the driveway of the house I once called home, I could smell the jasmine that my mother planted the summer before everything fell apart. I hadn't been here in 6 years. 6 years since they disowned me. 6 years since they said I brought shame to the family. Now here I was, wearing the heels I bought with my first real paycheck, holding the invitation to my brother's engagement party like a ticket to war. And believe me, I wasn't here to celebrate. I was here to collect. Hi, my name is Avery, and if you asked anyone in my family about me, they'd probably say I don't exist, that I died a long time ago, figuratively, of course. They cut me off completely when I was just 21 years old. No money, no shelter, no calls, no apologies, all because of a single choice I made about my own life. And tonight, they're going to regret every second of it. I know what you're thinking. Why go back? Why not just move on? Because sometimes moving on isn't enough. Sometimes the people who hurt you deserve to see who you've become, to see that you didn't just survive, you thrived. And more importantly, they need to understand that the girl they abandoned didn't disappear. She transformed. And now, I'm not the one who should be ashamed. They are. So when I smiled at my father that night, the same man who told me I wasn't his daughter anymore, he had no idea what I had planned. Not for him, not for my mother, not for any of them. If you were in my place, would you have come back for revenge, or just walked away forever? Comment below before you keep watching, and don't forget to subscribe, because this story, it's only getting started. I don't think you ever realize you're the disappointment in your family until it's too late to change it. It creeps in slowly, like mold behind perfect white walls. One day, you're just a kid, proud of your drawing pinned to the fridge. The next, you're sitting at dinner, watching your parents praise your brother for another academic trophy, while your silence goes unnoticed. That was my childhood in a nutshell. My name is Avery Callahan, and I was the second child. The unexpected one. The quiet one. The one they couldn't quite mold into the perfect daughter. We lived in a wealthy suburb of Connecticut. My father, Richard, was a man of few words, all of them sharp. A retired Navy officer turned high-ranking finance executive. He believed in discipline, legacy, and loyalty, especially to his name. My mother, Deborah, ran the home like a business. Always dressed, always perfect, always ready to greet the neighbors with a strained smile. Her love was conditional and often performative. And then there was Evan, my older brother, the golden child, captain of the lacrosse team, straight-A student, future Harvard grad. They didn't just love him, they invested in him. Me? I was the family's blurry photo. There, but never quite in focus. Still, I tried. God, how I tried to win their love. I joined the church youth group even though I hated crowds. I took ballet instead of art because that's what graceful girls did. I brought home polite boyfriends and straightened my naturally wavy hair until my scalp burned. I learned early on that being myself wasn't an option if I wanted their approval. And it worked, kind of. They tolerated me, smiled at me during dinner parties, let me exist in their perfect world as long as I didn't disrupt the illusion. But everything started unraveling the summer I turned 20. I was in my second year of college in New York, finally breathing, finally exploring who I was when no one was watching. And that summer, I made the boldest move I'd ever made. I brought someone home. Her name was Lila. I didn't introduce her as my girlfriend. I wasn't ready for that. I said she was my roommate, my best friend. And that part wasn't a lie. She was my best friend. But she was also the first person who ever looked at me like I was enough just by existing. The weekend was uneventful, at least on the surface. My mother was polite, overly so. My father asked Lila cold, clipped questions about her studies. Evan barely acknowledged us. But I caught the looks, the lingering glances, the forced calm. They knew. They didn't say it. Not yet. But they knew. The moment Lila left, the air shifted. I was in the kitchen, putting away the lemonade pitcher, when my father walked in. He didn't look at me. He just stood there for a second, then said, "You're not one of those, are you?" Like it was a disease. I stared at him. I could hear the ticking of the clock behind us, loud like a heartbeat. My throat was dry, but something in me snapped. For the first time, I didn't deflect. I didn't apologize for making them uncomfortable. I looked him right in the eye and said, "And what if I am?" The silence that followed was volcanic. Not loud, but scorching. He didn't say another word, just walked out. My mother didn't mention it. She pretended like nothing happened. But her eyes said everything. Disgust, fear, shame. And Evan? He smirked. Like I'd just confirmed something he always suspected. Something he found amusing. I went back to college the next day, but I could feel the shift. They called less. Texts became formal, cold. Then eventually, nothing. By the time my 21st birthday rolled around, I didn't hear a word from them. Not even a happy birthday. I kept telling myself it was just distance, that they needed time, that maybe someday they'd come around. But I was wrong, because the real betrayal didn't come in the form of silence. It came in the form of complete erasure. And that was only the beginning. People talk about heartbreak like it only happens in relationships. But let me tell you something. Being betrayed by your family, that's a different kind of grief. It's like mourning people who are still alive and choosing to pretend you're the one who died. After that summer, the silence from my family stretched on like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. No messages, no visits, no invitations home for holidays. I spent Thanksgiving eating a microwave dinner in my dorm room, listening to the sound of other people laughing with their families through thin apartment walls. And still, I held on to hope. I told myself they just needed time, that maybe I'd gone too fast, too soon, that I should have prepared them better, that maybe the silence was their way of coping. God, how naive I was. It wasn't until Christmas break that I realized something was truly wrong. I tried logging into the family's shared financial account, something my father had set up years ago to help with my school expenses. The login didn't work. I assumed I had forgotten the password, so I clicked Forgot Password. The message that popped up stopped me cold. This account has been permanently closed. I sat there, frozen, my mind racing. I checked my school tuition portal. My balance had been flagged as delinquent. I was already 2 months behind. Confused? Panicked? I called my mother. No answer. I tried my dad. Straight to voicemail. I called Evan, who never picked up unless it benefited him. But this time, he answered with a dry, almost amused tone. Wow, look who it is. Miss Independent. I didn't even have time to process the venom before blurting out, "Did Dad shut down the account? What's going on?" He laughed. Actually laughed. Then he said, "You made your choice, Avery. Actions have consequences." "What the hell are you talking about?" His tone turned cold. "You chose to humiliate this family. You chose her. So now you can choose to pay your own damn tuition and stop expecting us to carry your mistakes." And then he hung up. I stared at the screen like it might give me different answers. Like maybe if I stared hard enough, this nightmare would reverse. But no, this wasn't just about disappointment. This was punishment. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being erased. I called my school the next day, trying to explain that there had been a mix-up. They were sympathetic, but firm. I had 30 days to pay the balance or I'd be dropped from all my classes. That was the moment it hit me. They had planned this. The financial cutoff, the silence, the isolation. They didn't want me to struggle. They wanted me to fail. They wanted to break me, bring me crawling back, begging for forgiveness for the crime of loving who I loved. But I didn't crawl. I got to work. I picked up 2 jobs, one at a bookstore during the day and another bartending on weekends. I sold the designer purses my mother used to gift me for birthdays. I applied for every scholarship and emergency grant I could find. I learned to survive on black coffee, ramen, and pure determination. Some nights I cried until my face went numb. Some mornings, I woke up wondering if I had made a mistake. But then I'd remember the sound of Evan laughing, the way my father wouldn't even say the word gay, and I'd push harder. The final proof of their betrayal came about 6 months later, when I accidentally discovered just how far they had gone. I was visiting a friend back in Connecticut. On a whim, I walked past the old country club my parents frequented. There was a bulletin board near the entrance, full of upcoming events and announcements. That's when I saw it. A glossy flyer, announcing a Callahan Family Foundation fundraiser. It listed 3 board members, Richard Callahan, Deborah Callahan, and Evan Callahan. No Avery. Not just omitted. I wasn't part of the family anymore. Not even by name. They had started a family foundation, something we had talked about for years, something my mother once said would be our legacy. And now they had created it. Without me. They didn't just disown me. They rewrote the story to pretend I had never existed. That was the moment something changed in me. I stopped hoping they'd come around. I stopped grieving. I stopped trying to understand how people who raised me could hate me for something I never chose. I started planning, not for revenge at first, just for survival. But what began as survival would eventually become so much more. People talk a lot about heartbreak like it's something romantic. A bad breakup, a love lost, a partner cheating. But no one warns you what it feels like when it's your family who breaks your heart. When I found out what they did to me, cutting me off, pretending I never existed, launching a foundation with our last name and deliberately leaving me out, I went numb. It didn't feel real at first, like I was watching someone else's life play out from behind a glass wall. But when the shock wore off, the pain came rushing in like a flood, and it was unbearable. I didn't eat for days. I barely slept. I'd lay on my mattress, staring at the ceiling, replaying every memory I had with them, trying to spot the moment it all started to fall apart, trying to understand what I could have done differently. The truth? Nothing. That's what made it worse. I did everything I could to make them proud. I followed their rules, played their game. I spent years shaving down parts of myself to fit into their world. All for what? To be deleted from the family like a smudge on a mirror? It wasn't just the loss of love, it was the loss of identity. Who was I without them? Without a home to go back to? Without anyone who remembered the sound of my laugh when I was 6? Or the way I used to collect seashells in the summer? That kind of abandonment doesn't just hurt. It reprograms you. It rewrites your value. You start to wonder if you ever mattered at all. And I had sacrificed so much for them. I remembered the summer I skipped a writing internship I'd dreamed of for years, just so I could stay home and help my mom recover from surgery. I remembered the late nights I tutored Evan through calculus, even when I had my own finals to study for. I remembered the time I lied to a professor, telling him I had the flu, just because my dad demanded I fly home for a last-minute charity event so the family could look united. None of it mattered in the end. The moment I chose to live my truth, to love someone who didn't fit in their perfect little picture, they erased me. And that hurt in a way I can't fully explain. It was like being ghosted by your own blood, worse than death, because they were still alive, still smiling, still carrying on without me. I became obsessed with trying to understand how people who once kissed my forehead goodnight could now pretend I never existed. I started writing down every moment I could remember, every comment, every judgmental glance, every piece of the puzzle I'd ignored. And somewhere between the tears and the rage, a thought started to grow, quiet at first, but insistent. What if I stopped grieving and started planning? What if instead of breaking under their silence, I built something out of it? Because deep down, I knew something important. They didn't cut me off because I was weak. They cut me off because I scared them, because I was everything they couldn't control. And if there's one thing my parents hate more than shame, it's power they can't manipulate. They thought they buried me, but really, they just planted something they were never prepared to see grow. The day that realization hit me was the same day I stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized the girl staring back at me. I looked thinner, tired, hollowed out. But there was something else too. Steel. A sharpness in my eyes that hadn't been there before. I whispered to my reflection, "This pain isn't going to break you. It's going to make you." That was the day I stopped hoping for a call that would never come, stopped dreaming about a family reunion that would never happen, stopped crying for people who would never apologize. That was the day I started becoming her, the version of myself I'd always suppressed. Smart, focused, strategic, unafraid to take up space. I started small, fixing my resume, applying to better jobs, expanding my network. I took freelance writing gigs under a pen name just to build experience. I poured my pain into my work, into learning, into becoming so self-sufficient that no one could ever take anything from me again. But beneath all that growth, The seed of something darker had started to take root. Not hate, not revenge, not yet. Just intent. A sense that maybe, one day they would see everything they threw away. And maybe, just maybe, they would regret it. And if they didn't, well, I'd make sure they did. After months deconstructing everything I once believed about love, loyalty, and family, I did what I had to do. I adapted. I stopped crying in my room. I stopped checking my phone for messages that would never come. And slowly, I started rebuilding. At first, survival was the only goal. I needed to stay in school, pay rent, and keep my head above water. I worked 6, sometimes 7 days a week. Weekdays at a used bookstore, weekends bartending, late nights freelancing as a ghostwriter for blogs I didn't care about. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The more independent I became, the more dangerous I felt. Because now, there was nothing they could take from me. No control left to exert. No strings to pull. And once that fear left me, once I realized they no longer had any real power over me, I saw everything clearly. It was time to take that clarity and turn it into strategy. Because here's what no one tells you about being cut off. You get time. Time to observe, to study, to calculate. While they thought I was gone for good, I was paying attention. Quietly, carefully. I knew my family like a blueprint. My father? Obsessed with image. The man would rather die than be publicly embarrassed. His world was built on reputation, favors, and the illusion of moral authority. My mother? Terrified of scandal. She craved control, especially over other women. Her entire sense of purpose revolved around being seen as the perfect matriarch. And Evan? Well, Evan was the weakest of them all. Arrogant, entitled, and dangerously dependent on validation, especially from our father. So when I saw online that Evan was engaged, to a politician's daughter no less, I smiled. Because the Callahans were preparing for the most important event in years, a union between two powerful families, a public showcase of unity, legacy, and tradition, which meant they were vulnerable. I knew they wouldn't invite me. They'd rather rewrite history again than admit they had a daughter who didn't fit their mold. But I also knew something else. Appearances are everything in their world, and nothing ruins appearances faster than a well-placed truth. That's when the plan began to take shape. I didn't want to ruin Evan's life. I wanted to reveal it. You see, perfect little Evan wasn't as clean-cut as he liked to appear. Back in college, he had a reputation, and not a flattering one. Drunken parties, a cheating scandal, a complaint from a classmate that somehow never went public. All whispers at the time, but I remembered them. And I remembered who knew the full story. A friend of mine, Kara, who had worked in campus housing back then. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I reached out, she responded within minutes. Over coffee, she gave me what I needed. Screenshots, witness names, even a formal report that had been conveniently buried by my father's lawyers. My brother's mistakes had been cleaned up behind the scenes, but that didn't make them disappear. It just made them quiet. And now, I had the power to make them loud. Still, I didn't want to expose him right away. That would have been too easy. No, I wanted them to feel it coming. The shift in the air, the quiet unease, the creeping suspicion that something wasn't right. So I started small. An anonymous email to a local journalist, hinting at an untold story within the Callahan family. A fake Instagram account that followed Evan's fiancée and liked old posts from his college party days. A burner phone message sent to my mother's charity board chair. The Callahans are about to be in the news. You may want to prepare. Each move was subtle, untraceable. I didn't need to scream to be heard. In the meantime, I worked on myself. I rebranded. New clothes, new confidence, new job, marketing for a boutique firm downtown. I joined women's entrepreneur groups, networked, shared my writing anonymously online, built a quiet reputation of my own, far from the Callahan name. And while I crafted a new life, I made sure my presence started to echo in theirs. I RSVP'd yes to a public gala I knew they'd be attending, anonymously at first, then switching to my real name a week before the event. I posted a subtle throwback picture with Lila and tagged the event's sponsor. I let them see me rising, not begging, not broken, but thriving. That's when the final piece of the plan came together. Because despite everything, despite their silence, despite pretending I didn't exist, they couldn't help themselves. I received a message, not from my parents, but from their assistant. A formal, coldly polite email inviting me to Evan's engagement party. To avoid disruption, it said. I almost laughed. Disruption? They had no idea what I had in store. If you were in my shoes, would you accept the invitation and pretend nothing ever happened? Or would you expose the truth in front of everyone? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know what you would do. And don't forget to subscribe. The party's just getting started. I accepted the invitation with a calm smile on my face. No hesitation, no questions. Just one simple reply. Confirmed. Looking forward to it. Mike, the engagement party was scheduled to take place in a private estate just outside the city, surrounded by manicured gardens and old money architecture, the kind of place where reputations are displayed like jewelry. It was the perfect stage. In the days leading up to it, I rehearsed every detail. What I would wear, how I would walk in, who I would speak to. I left nothing to chance. Because in a world like theirs, presentation is everything. If I wanted my message to land, I needed to deliver it with precision. And still, the night before the event, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection for far too long. Not out of vanity, out of remembrance. I looked at my face and thought about the girl who once stood in this family's shadow, the one who begged for scraps of affection, who changed herself piece by piece to earn a seat at their table. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman with nothing to lose and everything to say. I wore a sleek, dark green dress that evening, elegant but striking, understated yet impossible to ignore. My hair was pulled back, my posture tall, and my expression calm. I arrived precisely on time. The estate was lit beautifully, with lanterns lining the driveway and soft music playing from the garden. Valets opened doors, servers passed champagne, and polished guests murmured in small, glittering circles. It was a scene straight out of a magazine. When I stepped through the entrance, conversations didn't stop, but eyes did turn, just for a second. Some recognized me, others didn't know who I was but sensed I didn't belong, and a few, including my mother, simply froze. She was standing by the staircase speaking with a donor from one of her charities. The moment she saw me, she stopped mid-sentence. Her smile didn't fade completely, but it faltered. Slightly. I walked over as if everything were perfectly normal. "Mother," I said with a soft nod. "Avery," she replied after a brief pause. "You came." Of course, I wouldn't miss it. She didn't embrace me, didn't ask how I was. She simply looked at me like one might look at an unexpected guest at a formal dinner, curious, cautious, and unsure whether to be polite or afraid. "We weren't certain you received the message." "I did. I appreciated the invitation." Our entire conversation lasted less than a minute, but underneath each word were layers of meaning neither of us dared to voice. And then I walked past her, into the heart of the party. Everywhere I looked, there were pieces of a life I was no longer part of. Family friends, former neighbors, board members from the foundation I had been erased from. They all smiled, shook hands, raised glasses. And then there was Evan. He was standing near the main terrace, surrounded by guests and his fiancée, Grace, a tall, graceful woman with a practiced smile and an expensive diamond on her finger. She didn't recognize me, of course, but Evan did. The moment he saw me, his expression changed. He didn't walk over immediately. No, that would have drawn attention. Instead, he excused himself from the group, took a drink from a passing tray, and came to greet me with the kind of forced warmth only siblings can master. "Avery," he said with a tight smile, "didn't expect to see you here." "Clearly," I replied, "but it's such a beautiful evening, I couldn't resist. You look different." "So do you." There was a long pause between us, years of silence, betrayal, and unspoken truths suspended in that moment. "What exactly are you doing here?" he asked, lowering his voice slightly. "Celebrating," I said simply. What else would I be doing? He studied me, trying to read my intentions, but I gave him nothing. Just a composed smile and a sip from my glass. What he didn't know was that by the time I stepped into that party, the wheels were already in motion. My plan had been activated days ago. An anonymous envelope had been sent to Grace's father's office. Inside were carefully selected documents. Verified. Precise. Not an attack, but a warning. I didn't want to destroy Evan's life. I wanted to offer the truth. Whether they chose to act on it, that wasn't up to me. But I would make sure that truth reached the right eyes. And if it shook their perfect little world, so be it. That night, I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply existed, powerfully, silently, and without shame, in the space they had once tried to erase me from. And that, I knew, was the beginning of the end. The night of the engagement party ended quietly. There were no confrontations, no scenes, no dramatic exits. Just polite smiles, whispered suspicions, and the unmistakable tension that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. I left without looking back. For the first time, I felt at peace. Not because I had won, but because I had taken back control. I had stepped into their world, uninvited, and stood there without flinching. That to me was a victory, but I should have known it wasn't over. Not yet. 2 weeks later, I received a message from a number I didn't recognize. No name, just a time and location. Tuesday, 4 p.m., Café Orleans. Come alone. At first, I considered ignoring it, but something about the simplicity of the message, the tone, the certainty, unsettled me. It wasn't a request. It was a statement. Curiosity won. When I arrived, the cafe was nearly empty. Late afternoon sunlight poured through the windows, casting long shadows across the tiled floor. A quiet jazz tune played overhead. It was the kind of place where secrets could be exchanged without raising eyebrows. She was already there when I walked in. Grace, Evan's fiancée? She looked exactly as she had at the party. Elegant, composed, effortlessly polished. But her expression was different now. No longer cordial, no longer smiling. "Thank you for coming," she said, without standing. "Please, sit." I took the seat across from her, studying her carefully. "I assume you know why I asked to meet," she said. I didn't respond. She pulled a manila envelope from her handbag and placed it on the table. "Your brother told me you were troubled, that you were angry, but he didn't tell me everything." My eyes didn't move from the envelope. "I received this 2 days after the party," she continued. "I've read it twice. I also asked a friend in legal to verify it. It's real." There was a long silence. "Did you send it?" "I made sure it reached you," I said quietly. She nodded slowly. Her face gave nothing away. "You could have released it publicly. I didn't want to destroy your life, just to make sure you had the full picture before you walked into something blind." She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. Her eyes never left mine. "You know what surprises me most about all this?" she said. "It's not what Evan did. It's that none of it shocked your parents. They've known for years." I felt my stomach drop. "What are you talking about? Your father covered it up. Your mother helped manage the press angle when a student threatened to go public. They even paid off a private investigator to discredit the girl who filed the complaint." I stared at her. I had suspected involvement, but not confirmation. "They didn't just erase you, Avery. They protected him, repeatedly. And from what I've learned, Evan isn't the only one who's done things your parents worked to cover up." She paused. "Your family is not just cruel, they're dangerous." I sat there stunned. I thought I had uncovered the full extent of their betrayal. I thought my exile was the worst of it. But now, I saw how deep it really went. My erasure hadn't been emotional. It had been tactical. They didn't just cut me off for shame. They cut me off because I wasn't controllable, because I might speak, because I was a risk. Grace didn't speak again for a while. She simply looked at me with something close to pity, or maybe it was respect. "I don't know if I'll marry him," she said finally, "but I needed to know the truth, and now I do, thanks to you." She stood up, placed a few bills on the table for her untouched tea, and looked down at me one last time. "Whatever you decide to do next, be careful. They're not done protecting themselves." And with that, she left. I sat there for a long time, staring at the envelope she had left behind. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew what it contained. Evidence of everything I had feared. And more. My plan had been about reclaiming my voice, showing them that they hadn't broken me. But now it had become something more. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the people they had silenced, the lives they had manipulated, the lies they had built their reputation on. And suddenly I realized my return wasn't just personal. It was necessary, because the real story wasn't mine alone, and I was no longer afraid to tell it. After the meeting with Grace, everything changed. What began as a personal reckoning had now evolved into something larger, something with weight, with consequence. I no longer saw myself as just a daughter abandoned. I saw myself as a witness. And witnesses tell the truth. I didn't rush. I didn't make noise. I took my time, thought through every step, because the people I was dealing with, my own family, were experts at manipulation, image control, and quiet intimidation. But they had one weakness. They believed no one would ever stand up to them. I intended to prove them wrong. The first move came quietly. I contacted a journalist I knew from my freelance work. Her name was Danielle, sharp, discreet, principled. She had written several features on institutional silence and had exposed 2 corporate scandals in the past 5 years. We met at a public library. I didn't want anything traceable. I showed her the files, the records, the witness statements. I explained the story, not just what had been done to me, but what had been done to others, and how it had been covered up. She listened carefully, took notes, asked the right questions, and then she asked the most important one. "Are you ready for what this could mean?" I nodded. "I'm not doing this for revenge anymore," I said. "I'm doing it for the truth, for the people who didn't have a voice." She began her research immediately, quietly. No leaks, no emails, nothing that could tip anyone off. We agreed on one condition. My name would not appear in the initial release. I didn't need fame. I didn't want credit. I just wanted them to feel what they had always feared: loss of control. 2 weeks later, the article went live. It was discreetly placed on a major investigative site under a neutral headline: "What Power Hides? Patterns of Silence in Private Institutions." But inside, it was explosive. It detailed how a wealthy Connecticut family had used money and influence to protect their son from accusations of misconduct, and how internal efforts to silence victims had been traced back to the family's patriarch and several associates. No names were printed, but those who lived in that world, they recognized the story. It spread quickly. Within 24 hours, whispers had become calls. Calls had become questions, and questions turned into pressure. The Callahan Foundation's board issued a formal statement, claiming full transparency and promising an internal review. My mother stepped down, temporarily, from her chair position at one of her favorite charities. And my father? He went silent. For the first time in my life, he had nothing to say. And Evan? He tried to deny everything, tried to paint himself as a victim of lies. But Grace was gone. She had left 2 days before the article was published. Her family, politically cautious, had quietly withdrawn their support. There would be no wedding, no alliance. Evan's future, so carefully constructed, was unraveling, thread by thread. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I watched, quietly, as the house of cards began to collapse under its own weight. Because this wasn't about destroying them. It was about freeing myself, about proving that the truth, even when whispered, is louder than any lie screamed through a megaphone. A week after the article went live, I received an email. No subject line, just one sentence. "You've made your point." It was from my father. I stared at the screen for several minutes, unsure how I felt. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what had been done, just a message soaked in resentment and barely veiled blame. Typical. I didn't reply. What was there to say? This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't closure. This was a line in the sand. And I had already stepped across it. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel. Peace. Not because they had been exposed. Not because their reputations had been shaken. But because I no longer carried the weight of their silence. I had spoken. I had acted. And now, they had to live with the consequences. just like I did. There is a unique kind of silence that follows a personal war. It is not the silence of absence, nor the silence of fear. It is the silence of completion. The moment when the dust settles, the voices fade, and all that remains is you, no longer broken, no longer hiding, but standing firmly on ground you built with your own hands. That was how it felt in the weeks after everything came to light. The article Danielle published gained traction slowly. It wasn't sensational. It didn't name names. It simply revealed patterns, facts, and a troubling trail of institutional silence. And those who knew understood exactly who it was about. My father's carefully built image took the first blow. Suddenly, he was unavailable for comment. Then, on indefinite leave, from 2 boards he'd once chaired. My mother, known for hosting pristine charity events and controlling the narrative of our family like a publicist, withdrew from social functions altogether. And Evan? He tried to maintain his version of the story, claimed he was being slandered, that it was all exaggerated, but his engagement had already been called off. Grace's family had distanced themselves with a clear, quiet finality. He was left without allies. For the first time, the power they held, over others, over me, had been fractured. But I didn't celebrate. There were no moments of gloating, no satisfaction in their fall, only stillness. Because I didn't do what I did for revenge. I did it for the truth. And the truth, once spoken, has a weight all its own. It does not need applause. In the months that followed, I focused on my life, my real life. I finished my degree. I was promoted at work, a role I earned entirely on my own merit. I moved into a small but beautiful apartment overlooking a park, where I could finally breathe without the echo of my past shadowing me. I began writing again, not for others but for myself, and, slowly, I began to heal. Then, one afternoon, I received a letter. It arrived without warning. A pale cream envelope, handwritten in the cursive I had once recognized with affection. My mother. There was no return address, but I knew it was her before I even opened it. Her handwriting had always been elegant, precise, controlled, just like her. The letter was short. She said she hoped I was well, that she had heard I was doing meaningful work, that she missed the way I used to play the piano in the mornings, before school. She didn't mention the article, didn't say the word sorry. But between the lines, there was a tone I hadn't heard from her in years. Something like hesitation. Something almost close to regret. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and set it aside. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. But I didn't write back. Because I had made peace with something far more valuable than her acknowledgement. I no longer needed it. Forgiveness, I learned, is not always an act of welcoming someone back. Sometimes, it's just the quiet choice to stop carrying what was never yours to hold. They made their decision, and now I had made mine. I didn't need to punish them. They had to live in the world they created, one where silence covers guilt, where control replaces love, where truth is feared instead of honored. That was their burden now. Mine was lighter. Several months later, I was invited to speak, anonymously, at a conference for women in leadership. The topic was reinvention. I agreed. And when I stood on that stage, in front of hundreds of women, many of them older, many of them carrying their own invisible wounds, I spoke the truth, not the scandal, not the betrayal, the healing. I told them about starting over without a safety net, about rebuilding an identity that had been erased, about learning to stop shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's expectations. And when I finished, there was silence, then applause. Real, warm, lasting. Afterward, a woman came up to me and held my hands. Her eyes were glassy, her voice low. Your story is mine too. That was when I understood. This journey, all the loss, the pain, the strength I had to gather, was never just for me. It was for every person who had ever been told they were too different, too much, too inconvenient to be loved. It was for those who were cast aside because they chose truth over comfort, integrity over appearance, freedom over obedience. And as I walked away from that stage, I felt it for the first time. Not relief, not vindication, but liberation. Not because I had won, but because I had let go. It was a gray morning in late October when I saw him again. I was walking out of a bookstore, arms full of newly printed essays for a small reading I'd been invited to speak at, when I heard someone call my name, Avery. I turned, and there he was, Evan, older, tired somehow, less polished than I remembered. His suit was still expensive, but there was a tension in his shoulders, a hollowness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The world around us moved, people passing, traffic humming, but we stood still, as if caught in a time neither of us really belonged to anymore. "Can we talk?" he asked. I considered walking away. Truly, I didn't owe him anything, not a word, not a second. But something inside me, curiosity maybe, made me nod. We sat on a nearby bench. The trees above us were turning gold. The wind carried that crisp scent of change that always comes with the end of the year. He cleared his throat. "I read the article," he said. I said nothing. "Grace left. Her father won't return my calls. Our firm lost 2 clients last month. I know you were behind it." I turned to him. "Do you?" He blinked, caught between accusation and something almost like remorse. "You could have ruined me," he said. "I didn't have to," I replied. "You did that yourself. I just made sure people knew who they were dealing with." He looked down at his hands. "I've had time to think," he said slowly, "about how we treated you, about what we allowed, what I allowed." A long pause followed. And then, softly, "I'm sorry. I didn't expect that. Not because I thought it was impossible, but because it didn't matter anymore." His apology wasn't a door opening. It wasn't a key turning in a lock I still wanted to open. It was just a word. And sometimes, words come too late. "You know," I said, "I spent a long time thinking that I needed this. That I needed someone in this family to look me in the eye and say those 2 words. And now? Now I know that what I needed was to forgive myself, forever believing I wasn't enough." He nodded. He looked older than I remembered. Smaller. Not physically, just less. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," I said quietly, "I go home, and I keep living my life." He looked at me, and for the first time in years there was no tension between us. Just truth, just silence, just distance. I stood up. He didn't follow. As I walked away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. That moment wasn't about closure. It wasn't about mending. It was about recognizing that some doors are meant to stay closed, and that walking away isn't weakness. It's strength. Across the street, I passed a woman pushing a stroller, a couple sipping coffee on a bench, a man playing saxophone softly near the corner. The world was still turning, and so was I. I had spent so long in the dark, trying to make others see me. But now, I didn't need to be seen by them. I saw myself, clearly, fully, and finally, freely. When people hear my story, they often ask me the same thing. Do you regret it? Do I regret standing up? Do I regret exposing the truth? Do I regret losing my family? And my answer is always the same. No, because what I lost was never truly mine. What I had with them was a version of love based on silence, performance, and control. It wasn't real. It was survival. What I have now, even if it's smaller, even if it's quieter, is mine. It is built on honesty, on self-respect, on courage. I've learned that sometimes you don't get justice in the way you imagined. Sometimes people never say the words you waited years to hear. Sometimes the ones who hurt you continue on, pretending nothing happened. But that doesn't mean you can't heal. Because healing isn't about changing the past. It's about choosing your future. And I chose mine. I chose to stop chasing validation from people who made me feel small. I chose to create a life that reflected who I truly was. I chose to speak, even when my voice shook. And in doing so, I found a strength I didn't know I had. To anyone listening, if you've ever felt erased, unheard, or unworthy because of someone else's standards, please know this. You are not the problem. You are not the shame. You are not the burden. You are your own beginning. You are your own second chance. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge is not revenge at all. It's living a life you're proud of. A life where you never again ask for permission to exist. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you once called family? Have you ever had to rebuild from nothing, just to protect your peace? tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and if this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories like this, because sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most powerful new beginnings.